I will say my two favorite people in the entire world. We are so privileged to have two amazing keynote speakers, my good friends, Cara Natterson and Vanessa Kroll Bennett. And let me share with you about the amazing work that these women are doing. So first, I would love to go ahead and introduce Dr. Cara Natterson. Cara is a leading voice in puberty and adolescent health. Cara is also a pediatrician, a speaker, and the co-host to one of my favorite podcasts, This Is So Awkward. She is also the author of 10 books, including their newest co-authored book between Cara and Vanessa, This Is So Awkward, Modern Day Puberty Explained, and the New York Times best-selling The Care and Keeping of You series. When her own kids started puberty, Cara founded the Order of Magnitude, the first company aimed at making the stage of life more comfortable with product and content. Cara graduated from Harvard College and Johns Hopkins Medical School, trained at UCSF, and lives in Los Angeles. Now, I would love to go ahead and the honor to present Vanessa Kroll Bennett. Vanessa is a puberty expert, podcaster, writer who helps adults navigate uncertainty when supporting the kids they love. Again, she is also the co-author of This Is So Awkward, Modern Day Puberty Explained, co-host of This Is So Awkward podcast, and is the president and content at the Order of Magnitude. Vanessa was also the founder of the Dunimo Girl, a company focused on building girls' self-esteem through sports and puberty education. She is a graduate of Wesley College, and Vanessa also holds a master's in Jewish history, but perhaps her most important schooling comes from raising her own 4 children between the ages of 13 to 20. What is not in their bios, because I just love these ladies so much, is they have been featured in Good Morning America. They have been featured in Oprah, and so I am huge fans of AMAZE. So I am thrilled to go ahead and present both Dr. Cara Natterson and Vanessa Kroll Bennett. Help me in welcoming them both. Cara and Vanessa, hi, ladies.
Hi. What
Hello.
a welcome.
Cara, you're amazing. And
Yes.
before I hand it over to Vanessa, I'm just going to say on behalf of both of us, we have been fans of AMAZE for years. We have been amplifying what you do as long as we have known about you. I've done it in the classroom. Vanessa's done it on sports fields and in workshops. We've done it when we've spoken. We tell everyone about the work you do because it is truly some of the best content out there. So thank you for having us. We are just thrilled to be here.
Oh, thank you all so much.
So we're going to run through our keynote and we're going to leave time for questions afterwards. If you have questions as we go, please put them in the chat. Just know it's hard for us to run the deck and see the questions. So if we don't answer them as we go, it just means we'll get to them afterwards when we stop sharing our screen. We're so excited to be here. I'm going to start sharing. Cara, if you can give me a thumbs up and just make sure that people can see the deck properly. Every time I do it, it feels like the first time. Amazing. Thank you. It's sort of like parenting tweens and teens. It never goes the way you think it's going to go. So you are a group of experienced educators, people who are passionate on this subject. So we're going to give you a taste of what we talk about, how we help adults, trusted adults, coaches, mentors, healthcare professionals, parents, all sorts of relatives, how we help them feel more informed. For some of you, this may be information you know, but it may be a new bent on what you already know. For others of you, we may present new science or new perspective on topics you're already teaching and sharing in your communities. Again, please feel free to throw questions in the chat. So what are we going to do this morning? First, we're going to run through how you leave your own puberty and adolescence baggage at the door, which is critical anytime we are working or caring for kids during this stage. Next, we're going to redefine what modern puberty looks like with updated data. And finally, we're going to empower everyone here with concrete ways into conversations about specific topics like mood swings, brain development, and pornography. So first, normally we do this in a big auditorium with lots of people and we're staring at all of them. And what I'll do is ask everyone to plant their feet on the ground and sit up a little taller, drop their shoulders away from their ears, take a deep breath and close their eyes. And I'm going to ask you to think about your puberty, your years. Maybe it was 6th grade and you woke up with a new lump or bump or smell or curve. Maybe it was 7th grade and you went to the lunchroom and you had no one to sit with and you felt really, really lonely. Maybe it was 8th grade and the person you had a crush on was standing by their locker and you walked past them and you got that sort of nauseous, sort of wonderful feeling. And for those of you from international communities, 6th grade is the equivalent of about 11, 7th grade is about the equivalent of 12, then 8th grade is about the equivalent of 13. So what we think of as historically the central years of puberty. Think about how those memories feel in your belly, in your chest, on the back of your neck, on the palms of your hands. Those memories, as you open your eyes, you can remember those memories more than what you had for lunch yesterday or even what year it is. They're seared into our brains, and there's really good neurological data for why that is. That's normal. And yet, when we go to the business of working with kids, talking to them about puberty and adolescence and all of those beautiful, messy topics, we can't bring our puberty into those conversations because kids are working so hard to carry their own experience. It's heavy enough. And if we give them our baggage on top of their baggage, it just adds to their burden. So if those memories, if those experiences are bubbling up to the surface and you feel like you really need to talk to someone about them or share or remember, we like to tell people that you should find your own trusted adults. We tell kids to get trusted adults, and we're going to ask you to find your trusted adults and hand your baggage to that trusted adult. Don't hand it to the kid in your life.
So some of you, I love to hear that there was a medical student in the audience asking a question. Some of you know a lot about hormones. Some of you may know very little about the biology of hormones. Vanessa and I are big believers that we should establish a sort of a level playing field, the information everyone needs in order to be able to then talk about all this stuff. So this is how we teach parents, trusted adults, and kids about sex hormones. So when puberty begins, the brain releases 2 hormones, LH and FSH, okay? And those 2 hormones come out of the pituitary gland and they go down to distant organs, because the definition of a hormone is a chemical that's produced in one part of the body and then acts on another part of the body. So LH and FSH produced in the brain, and they leave the brain and they go down to either the ovaries or the testicles, whichever one that body happens to have. And those 2 hormones tell the testicles to make testosterone, because that's what they do, or the ovaries to make estrogen and progesterone, because that's what they do. When those organs start to make their hormones, those hormone levels rise, and they don't just rise below the neck, right? They circulate up in and around the brain, and they go up towards the production epicenter of LH and FSH, and the brain gets a signal, oh, we're good. We got enough estrogen, or we got enough testosterone. And so LH and FSH turn off. Those levels drop. Then there's no more signaling to the testicles or to the ovaries. So testosterone levels drop, or estrogen and progesterone levels drop. And eventually the brain gets a signal, wait a second, there's not enough estrogen, or there's not enough testosterone. And it turns back on LH and FSH, and the cycle begins anew. So this is called positive and negative feedback looping. This is how hormones work in the body. If there are any people who are endocrinologists who study hormones, I apologize for the simplicity of the description, but it gives everyone a start, right, to understanding a couple of things about puberty. One is We're talking about rising and falling and rising and falling hormones. And second of all, this is not happening slowly and steadily over many years, but it is happening in a very jerky fashion over hours. So every 6 or 8 or 10 or 12 hours, you might get a spike in hormones and then a drop in hormones, which is going to become significant in a few minutes. One last detail about the sex hormones, which is that every single body makes all 5 of these hormones. This is a really important fact. Ovaries are excellent at making estrogen and progesterone, but they also can make a little testosterone. Testicles are excellent at making testosterone, but they can also make a little bit of estrogen. And the adrenal glands, which sit on top of the kidneys, can make all of these sex hormones as well. This is why every single person has a little bit of measurable hormone, of all these hormones, and why we see bodies impacted by hormones that we don't always expect to be in them. For instance, half of all boys will develop breast buds or breast tissue during puberty. It's because they all have a little bit of estrogen in their body and they all have breast tissue that's sensitive to that estrogen. So when we talk about this and when we explain to people that it is typical for every human to have a little bit of all of these, it helps to open the door to conversations about things that can be scary or stressful or really confusing for kids.
So for those of you on here who are joining as educators or medical students, like, you know this information, right? This is the list of physical changes during puberty, except there are some angles that we use when we talk to teachers or parents to help give them a better sense of exactly what's happening during puberty. And for those of you in the UK, there's Mr. Messy in the corner. Roger Hargreaves might be slightly mortified to know that we're using his Mr. Messy in a puberty talk. But Mr. Messy is there in the corner to remind us all that while there are certain changes that happen typically at the onset of puberty, breast development in all kids, but for sure in girls, and penile and testicular growth in kids with penises and testicles, that there's lots of other physical changes that happen that don't happen in any particular order. There's a little bit of a sense of the timeline, but as Cara will talk about in a second, that timeline has actually shifted and changed just in our lifetime. So in addition to breast development, which anyone who has grown breast buds knows, those things stick out of everything you wear. Like, you could be wearing a down coat and the breast buds would stick out of it. And yet in the inverse, penile and testicular growth is a super private thing. It happens really, really slowly. And normally it's, you're not walking around naked. So nobody knows that for those first couple of years of male puberty, that slow penile and testicular growth is not visible to anyone. The other thing that happens are periods or menstruation. Those are really a middle marker of puberty. Those are not at the beginning. Those are not at the end. And that's important to know as we talk about the research in a minute. One of our favorite things to talk about with kids when we talk to audiences of middle schoolers and high schoolers is to say things like erections or boners out loud, to say things like wet dreams and nocturnal emissions out loud, and then to educate them on these things, because so often these topics are just treated as jokes. And for boys sitting in the audience who feel like it's only something to laugh about, we're able to say to them, hey, the reason we're talking about this with you all is because we hear from a lot of men who were really worried that something was wrong with them when they were in puberty and they had spontaneous erections and didn't know how to handle it, or woke up from a night's sleep and had a wet dream and thought something was wrong with them, or they had wet the bed. So it's really important to include all kids in these conversations. They all need reassurance. They all need science. We talk about growth spurts, right? So growth spurts are not just the height gain in puberty, they're the weight gain, the added curves and musculature. We really, really reinforce that it's very common for some kids to gain extra weight in the years leading up to puberty. We encourage adults not to make comments about kids' weight or body shape, and also to protect them from comments from other adults in their lives. We also normalize that some kids will grow up really quickly without gaining a lot of weight, and that may cause people to make unwelcome comments as well. So we want to be super aware of that. And then a fun fact that we throw in is that kids of all ages, kids of all genders and sex have voice drops. And people assume it's just males, but actually biological females do as well. So what's interesting about this list, and you may be surprised that 3 things are not on this list, right? I see a raised hand, and I have a feeling that raised hand is going to be a question about why isn't acne, why isn't body hair, and why isn't body odor on this list? That, Jill, I hope that was your question, because we're about to answer it. So those 3 phenomenon that we think of as puberty are actually part of a physiological process called adrenarche. And adrenarche is governed by the adrenal glands. You can see there's little yellow triangles on top of the kidneys. And on the gentleman on the left, you can see his testicles, his kidneys, and on top of the yellow triangles are the adrenal glands. And the adrenal glands produce a bunch of different hormones. We're going to talk now about DHEA and DHEAS, but they also produce cortisol, which is going to become relevant, which is the stress hormone. But in this case, DHEA and DHEAS tell the sebaceous glands in the pores to produce thicker, more protein-rich sweat, and to grow hair in new places, and to grow thicker, darker hair in places where it didn't, where it already existed. So what does that do? The thicker, protein-rich sweat can, number one, clog the pores, and then the bacteria that lives on the skin may go to those clogged pores and bring white blood cells, and all of a sudden you have whiteheads or acne. So that's one thing that's caused by adrenarche. The second thing is that protein-rich sweat gets eaten by the bacteria living on our skin. We have a natural microbiome living on our skin, and it is an amazing feast for that bacteria. It digests that sweat, and then the bacteria farts out the sweat. So what we think of as BO is really bacteria fart. That is a fun fact that kids of all ages love. And then finally, adrenarche is the hair growth, pubic hair, underarm hair, facial hair, back hair, nose hair, ear hair, thicker hair on legs and arms. That is also part of adrenarche.
All right, so let's go back to our timeline here. So we started with Tanner in the 40s, 50s, and 60s. And it bears mentioning that while he did establish that the average age for the start of puberty was 11 for girls and 11 and a half for boys, in fact, there has always been a wide range, right? There are always kids who start earlier. There are always kids who start later. And when you look at the range, which goes a couple of years on either side, there are also kids who start much earlier. And those are the kids that you might hear called early bloomers. And there are kids who start much later. Those are the late bloomers. So if 95% of all kids who are going through puberty sit in the middle, the 5% split on either side, 2.5% early, 2.5% late, that's the group that's sort of in the extreme. So just to make sure those terms are clear. So all the way through the mid-1990s, Tanner's numbers were the way that we understood puberty to be. And it was what I was trained in medical school. We were supposed to see puberty starting around 11 or 11 and a half, give or take. But in the early 1990s, there was a doctor of public health practicing at Duke University, and she started seeing patients come into her clinic, one after another, who were in puberty a lot earlier than 11. And she's like, this is odd. I don't know if it's just here in my local community, if it's in my region, or is it possible that this is a national phenomenon? So she reached out to the American Academy of Pediatrics, And she said, I'd like to study it. And the AAP said, that sounds fantastic. Here, we will fund you and we will help give you a network of pediatricians. And they launched what was called the PROSE study. And the data was published in 1997. It was under Marcia Herman Giddens as a primary researcher. And what did that headline say on every paper across the US? It said, girls are entering puberty earlier than ever. The average age was now 10, and it was a girl problem. Now, mind you, Marcia Herman Giddens only studied girls. She studied 17,000 of them, but this is significant. I also want to mention her study looked different from Tanner's. So Tanner's was pictures with occasional exams. Hers was every kid was examined, labs were drawn, there were different measurements made. One of the most common questions Vanessa and I get is, so they were examining kids in the 90s. So the two things aren't really equivalent and maybe nothing really changed. And I want to remind you, Tanner looked at pictures looking for penile and testicular growth and breast growth. When Marcia Herman Giddens and all the other people studying puberty in the 90s looked at kids, they were looking for the same evidence. So it was actually equivalent, and puberty was actually moving earlier. One other thing is, in Herman Giddens' study, she divided kids into two racial groups, okay? Now, the language across all these studies is different. So I'm gonna use the terms white, Black, and Hispanic because those are used in the majority, but it does not mean that's the terminology that's used in every study. Marcia Herman Giddens looked at white kids compared with Black kids. And what she found was that if you were Black, you were first to puberty. Flash forward to 2005. A pediatric endocrinologist, so endocrinologists are hormone doctors, a pediatric endocrinologist named Louise Greenspan joined a group of adult endocrinologists to look at what Marcia Herman Giddens had studied in the 90s to see if it was really true. And they collected their data between 2005 and 2010 and published in 2010. And what did they find? They found that the timeline had moved back even earlier. Now, the average age of the beginning of puberty in girls was between 8 and 9. And when you looked at racial groupings, and now they had 3 racial groups, they found if you were Black, you were first to puberty. If you were Hispanic, you were somewhere in the middle. And if you were white, you were last. But it was a very tight window between 8 and 9 for the average onset. Of course, there were earlier. And of course, there were later, a lot later. One thing that's important to note about Louise Greenspan, she has gone on to be one of the most important researchers in the shifting landscape of puberty. And she has measured things like periods and the first period, menarche, because she's looking to answer the question, well, if puberty is starting earlier, is it happening faster? And, Vanessa said a few minutes ago that periods are really a middle marker of puberty. They don't happen at the beginning, they don't happen at the end, they happen somewhere in the middle. So if puberty is happening a lot earlier and it's happening faster, the first period should come a lot earlier too. But actually, what Louise Greenspan and many others have found is that while the starting age of puberty has moved up by 3 years, the starting age of a first period has only moved up by about 3 to 6 months, okay? So it used to be that the average age of first period was about 12 3/4. And up until earlier this year, all the data suggested that it had moved to 12 1/2. There is new data out this year that shows that girls are getting their period on average at 11.9 years. So that would be 9 months sooner. What I'm really curious about is that a COVID phenomenon? Did something change the data there, or is this something we're going to see sustained? But either way, periods are happening a little bit earlier. Puberty is happening a lot earlier. So what does this mean? It means that people are taking more time through puberty. Puberty is lasting longer. It's stretching like taffy. It is taking about a decade to get through it. Now, something may be jumping out at you here. I mentioned that when Herman Giddens first published her study, the world decided we had a girl problem. Well, it turns out nobody was studying boys. So Marsha Herman Giddens, who was retired at this point, she was literally gardening. I called her for an interview one day and she was like, oh yeah, I was in my garden gardening. When she realized no one had any interest in studying boys, she said, I've got to go do it. So she did. She left retirement. She went and studied 4,000 boys. She documented that the same phenomena was happening to boys. Boys' average age of puberty went from 11 and a half to between 9 and 10. If you were Black, you were first to puberty. And then you know what she did? She went right back into retirement.
So what does it mean that puberty's expanded? Why has puberty expanded? And it's really two different phenomena. One is a biological shift, as Cara just documented the research about puberty moving earlier and lasting longer. So it now lasts almost a decade as opposed to the 3 or 4 years that we think of as puberty. Hormones are shifting sooner, which also means that they're impacting the lives of kids sooner as well. And we're going to get into some of the ways that hormones affect kids. Why are hormones circulating in the body sooner? Well, there's many answers and there's not one kind of golden nugget answer, but based on the research we have so far, there's two really major impacts. One are the endocrine disrupting chemicals in the things we put into and onto our bodies and in our environment. Some of you may have seen the research recently about musc-ambret, which is one of these EDCs, which has been officially tied to causing earlier puberty in girls. There's also the local and global stressors. I mentioned earlier that cortisol is another hormone produced by the adrenal glands. That's the stress hormone. And there's data that tells us that kids living in chronic stress have elevated levels of cortisol over sustained periods of time. And that can flip into sex hormones, starting the puberty process up and running earlier than it might have. But in addition to all the biological changes, the definition of puberty has expanded to include the whole social, emotional, familial, all of those shifts and transformations as well. So that puberty and adolescence overlap. If you looked at a Venn diagram, they would be almost indistinguishable, the two circles. And the last thing is, I mentioned this earlier, people, when you tell people you're writing a book about puberty, they assume it's about girls. And it's a funny thing because half the population of men, it's not like they magically sprang from the earth fully formed. Everybody goes through puberty. Everybody goes through this journey. And so it's also expanded to include boys in the conversation about puberty, not just make it a girl conversation. So those are all the ways that it has expanded. We're now going to move into some specific areas that are sort of the greatest hits questions that we get from people. And the number one question we get is about managing mood swings. So I just want to set the stage for everyone, and then we're going to go into the science of mood swings. So it's the beginning of the school year for, many of us here. It's a stressful time. Kids are managing all sorts of stuff. Maybe you're home at the end of the day, you're back from work, your kid is home from school, and they come in like a tornado and they're screaming and they're crying and they're shouting at you, and they leave the room and you're like, and then they come back in the room and they're shouting at you more and you're like, oh my God, I am raising such an ungrateful kid. What is wrong with this child? What is happening? So, Cara, can you reassure and explain to people that this is not a bad kid? This is a kid handling a mood swing. What is going on?
So this is the last time you'll see a picture of our two teenagers sitting on a wall, we promise. But we use it as a reinforcement for you because, as we said, these hormonal loops are really all that people need to know to understand the biology of puberty. And remember, LH and FSH turn on. Then they amplify signals to tell the testicles to make testosterone, which goes way up. Or they send messages to the ovaries to produce estrogen and progesterone. And when those hit high enough highs, LH and FSH turn off. And then the testosterone levels plummet, or the estrogen and progesterone levels plummet. So there is this seesawing, high, high, low, low, shifting change in the levels of these sex hormones. And they really do impact the way that the neurons fire inside the brain. These hormones are in the fluid that surrounds the brain, and they change the way the brain works, and they change the way people feel. We all know that. We've all experienced it. Well, kids, not only are they experiencing it, but they're experiencing it in a more dramatic fashion than we ever did. And that's for two reasons. The first is that their levels of sex hormones, especially testosterone and estrogen, hit high highs like we'll never see. The highest levels of testosterone in the body happen in the teen and early 20s. That's it. From there on out, your highest highs tend to be lower. So the difference between the high level and the low level is greatest in the teen and young adult brain. The other reason, and we'll get into brain science in a second, but the other reason is that the teen brain is a brain that feels things in bigger ways. And so the combination means that the mood swings that you see are in fact biological.
I love having an ASL interpreter as part of this, because the way the expressiveness of this experience of mood swings is so beautifully expressed through ASL interpretation that it's like, it's a beautiful thing. So thank you to our interpreter. We really appreciate your work. So how do you handle mood swings, right? Because your kid is coming in hot in the classroom or at home or on the sports field. And the reaction, the natural reaction, is to feel under threat as the adult and to elevate to the point where they are elevated. Except our job is to help bring down the temperature, not to keep the temperature at an all-time high. So there's a few things. We don't go negative normally, but we're going to go a little bit negative to start, which is to talk about the things that we shouldn't say. So the temptation is to tell a kid who's coming in hot, either angry or upset or just simmering moodiness, to tell them to calm down. Except we all know that doesn't work. No one in the history of the world has ever calmed down because someone told them to calm down. In fact, it probably makes us a little more upset. Another really wonderful, not helpful one is don't be so dramatic, which again, if you're elevated and someone is invalidating your feelings, that does not feel great. A third one that comes up a lot when we talk to kids is it's not a big deal, except as Cara just explained, kids these years feel things more strongly than anyone younger than they are or older than they are. And it does feel like a big deal. It is a big deal to them. And I have to tell you, when we talk to kids, audiences of kids, and we tell them, you know what, you're not imagining it. You do feel things more strongly. You should see the looks of relief on their faces. They just feel like, oh my God, there's nothing wrong with me. This is normal. So we want to validate if we can, but we don't always have to talk about what's happening in the moment. Sometimes we want to pivot. Let's get you a glass of water. Let's walk the dog. Let's lie on the couch. Let's stare at the ceiling. But for some people, it's really hard not to talk. I don't know if you're one of those people. I'm one of those people. Cara is one of those people where we have to say something. So if you can't help yourself and you have to say something, you just validate what's going on. So you say something like, oh, that really sucks. Lisa D'Amour, who we love, says that stinks. But Lisa is much more refined than I am. She's from Ohio and I'm from New York. So I say that sucks. But you choose the language that works best for you. Do you want me to help or do you want me to just listen? Right? We're just validating. And when you mess up, because you will mess up over and over and over again when you are caring for kids through this stage of life, you take a do-over. And the do-over sounds like, hey, you know what? I didn't respond the way I wanted to respond to you this morning. Can I get another chance? Or I had an outsized reaction when you needed my help. Can I have another chance, right? And what does that do? First of all, people say, oh, well, doesn't that undermine my authority to kids? It does not undermine your authority. It shows your humanity. Kids love nothing more than when adults admit to having made a mistake. And number two, it shows them that when they mess up, because a mood swing feels crummy, it feels stressful and shameful and embarrassing and out of control. When we say, hey, everybody in this house gets a do-over, when we say that, it tells kids, oh, they're getting a do-over, that means I get a do-over. And if you think of a mood swing like a kid sitting at the bottom of a well with no way out, and when a do-over is like a ladder being thrown down and they can climb out with our help, it's so critical that kids see that as an option when they're having a mood swing.
I'm gonna essentially skip over this slide just to save a little time so we can get to questions. All I will say is it can be very hard for adults to distinguish between mood swings that happen on account of hormones and mood swings that happen on account of bigger mental health issues. These are some of the things to look for. We can certainly talk about it in the Q&A. But if you're feeling like, boy, this is tricky, one of the things that you can remember is that hormones shift on the order of hours. When it's depression, that typically you see symptoms that last on the order of days, sometimes weeks. And when in doubt, reach out to a mental health expert.
So the next part of the keynote, we're going to talk about brain development and decision making. This is just to help us all feel grounded in the mystery of how you can have a conversation with a kid and they tell you everything you want to hear and they have all the right answers. And then they turn around 2 hours later and do the exact opposite of what they said they were going to do. So Cara, kids are not bad kids. They are good kids. They want to do the right thing. What is going on for them with their brain development that causes this disconnect?
Yeah, so the example Vanessa often uses in front of audiences is to describe the amazing conversation that parents have with a kid about vaping, only to hear 2 hours later that their kid was vaping on the corner, right? And you're like, what is going on? Well, when we talk about brain development, there are two things that are happening in the developing brain. One thing is called pruning. So pruning is like pruning a tree. We're born with too many neurons in our brain. And then between birth and age 3, we end up growing more and more of them. And there just is too much to use efficiently. So the rest of your life, spare this little window between ages 9 and 12, the rest of your life, all you do is lose neurons you don't use. And that's not a bad thing. It helps us hone our skills. It makes us expert at things, but it's also why it's harder for adults to learn new things compared to kids. Okay, that's one type of brain development. That's not what people are talking about when it comes to teenage decision making. What people are talking about is myelination. So myelination is the insulation of nerve fibers in the brain. Your brain is filled with neurons that are electrical. They send electrical impulses. That's how they communicate with each other. So think about your cell phone charger. Okay, it's a wire that's covered with plastic. The plastic insulates the wire so that when someone touches the wire, they don't get a shock, right? Because there's something coating it. That allows the message to be sent more efficiently, more quickly. The same is true in your brain. So the brain covers the wires, the neurons, in a very specific order. It starts at the back and works its way to the front. It starts in the middle and it works its way out and lays down fat cells. That's the insulation material, one by one by one, covering these nerve fibers. It takes almost 30 years for this layer of fat cells called myelin to cover the entire brain. Why does it matter? Because any neuron that's covered with myelin can send and receive messages faster. What is fully myelinated by middle school? Well, the middlemost part of the brain. It's about halfway up and halfway out. That's the part of the brain called the limbic system. You all know about the limbic system. It's the risk reward, feel good, highly motivated part of the brain. It's the part of the brain that is engaged in new things. It's the part of the brain that studies for a math test, does well, feels great about it, and wants to study again. But it's also the part of the brain that's like shoplifting, right? That's the limbic system. The prefrontal cortex is all the way out here. It's the really smart, consequential thinking part of the brain, but it's the part of the brain that is going to take the longest to myelinate. So kids are sending messages throughout their brain trying to make decisions, but it takes a really long time for messages to get out here to the smarter, more consequential part. And as a result, their limbic system dominates. They make choices that feel good over choices that are rational and smart. Now, not always. They can sit at the dinner table and access their prefrontal cortex because we're a little bit boring. We're adults. But when they're around their friends, their limbic system is in complete control in their brain. And that is why their decision making is not excellent. And to answer the question you're all thinking, you can hack your brain. You just need to give it time to send signals to the right places.
So you might be wondering, like, why do we even bother? Why don't we just wait till they're 30 and just have all those conversations now? Because as Cara mentioned, we can have impact, even if they do the opposite of what they say they're going to do at the dinner table. We're building muscle memory. I like to think of kids' brains, which are truly under construction, right? They are roads, bumpy dirt roads being turned into super highways. And while they're under construction, we have an opportunity to have an impact on those pathways. And I like to think of it as wet cement, like we're putting handprints in wet cement. And when you do that, you can't always see the handprint all that well when the cement is wet. But when they dry, the handprints are really evident. So it's still worth having these conversations. We're helping them build muscle memory. We're empowering them to strategize and problem solve. And don't expect these to be kumbaya conversations where a kid says to us, "Oh, I'm so grateful we had this conversation about decision making." No, but if they're still in the room, they are still listening. They can still hear you, even if the arms are crossed and the shoulders turn and the hood is up. If they're still there, they can still hear you. Don't forget about the science. AMAZE videos are incredible. We have a bunch of videos about brain development and decision making. We have a whole chapter in our book about it. Explain the science. People assume kids don't care about the science or aren't interested. It's not true. They love it because it makes them feel less ashamed and less embarrassed. It helps them realize it's not all under their control. And the last thing is to help kids figure out strategies to buy themselves time to make better decisions. Help kids brainstorm and think about, do I do a 30-second plank to buy myself time? Do I text a trusted adult or a friend to pause and give myself time? Help them think about how to buy time so the prefrontal cortex can be part of the conversation. So we're going to close with something lovely and something complicated, and then we'll take questions. And the lovely thing are crushes. So kids this age have really beautiful, deep connection with other kids. Sometimes they're romantic and sometimes they're platonic, but kids want to see others and be seen by others. They want deep connection. Sometimes it's as if kids want to crawl inside each other. They want to be so close with each other. And it's beautiful because they're laying the foundation for trusted, loving, meaningful connections with someone else, which hopefully down the road in their lives, they will have many of these loving, meaningful relationships. Except there's another side to this stage of life.
And that is that they're seeing pornography. And they're often seeing it before they've ever had a first kiss or held someone's hand. The average age of first porn viewing in this country is 12. 15% of 10-year-olds have seen it. This is Common Sense Media data that came out last year, but it was a surprise to no one who has been reading this literature for a long time. Yes, they're at risk if they have their own phone, but frankly, it finds them, and it finds them across all sorts of devices. And so they're at risk if they don't have their own phone as well. They're all connected all day long through school. This study showed that 40% of porn viewing happens at school. I mean, that's just stunning statistic. And today's porn looks different. It's not a centerfold in a magazine, not a still image. It is video. This is free porn we're talking about here. So free porn tends to look like this. It tends to look violent. It tends to look aggressive. It tends to look non-consensual. And these videos play one after another, after another, after another. So what we emphasize with the trusted adults in kids' lives is they can put their head in the sand and they can decide this is too uncomfortable and they don't want to have the conversation. But then someone else is having the conversation with their kid about porn, and it's the pornographer. So Vanessa, do you want to close with explaining how we teach people to talk about it?
Yeah, so there's actually a wonderful AMAZE video about how porn is not real life sex. So I would encourage you to check that out. We actually use it in our curriculum and our parent membership, along with a ton of other AMAZE content. So how do you talk about porn, right? When we talk to adults, I always say to them, like, it's like you have like a little bit of vomit in the back of your throat at the idea of having this conversation. And we get it, but like the stakes are really, really high. So you got to have this conversation. So in order to talk about porn, you need to have had the conversation about sex. And if you haven't had the conversation about sex, it's time to have that. Hopefully before any of this, you've taught kids the correct anatomical language for body parts. You've been having conversations with about consent for years with kids, having nothing to do with sex. So by the time you get here, those are terms that are familiar. Ultimately, we want to make sure that adults are having inclusive conversations with kids about sex. There's not one kind of sex. We say there are 4 kinds of sex. Many people were only raised with vaginal penile sex, but that's only one kind of sex. We want to make sure ultimately they're talking to kids about oral sex, anal sex, and masturbation. But when we speak to audiences, we'll say, if you have to start somewhere and that feels most comfortable, you can start with talking about that vaginal penile sex, and you can just use 2 sentences and it sounds like this. One way people choose to have sex is one person puts a penis inside another person's vagina. They have consent. Hopefully it feels good and they feel connected to each other. And it is a positive experience. And then the kid will look at the adult and say, thank you very much. I need to get out of here. Fine. Another way to have a conversation about porn once you've had the sex talk is to say, have you ever heard the word porn or pornography? Is that a word you've heard of? What does it mean to you? You can always start with definitions. The main point is lead with curiosity, not with shame. A kid is going to be terrified that they've done something wrong if they've stumbled upon it or someone showed it to them. They might be confused. They might be scared. So we want to make ourselves a trusted place to go to have these conversations, even if you're screaming inside your own head. Fake it till you make it. Be calm. Tell them you won't freak out and that you are always available to answer questions. And 15% of 10-year-olds in the US are exposed to porn. So 10-year-olds, that's our recommended age for having this conversation.
So before we start taking questions, I just want to show you what Vanessa and I have built, which is a platform that is designed to help every trusted adult through all of these conversations. We have taken every podcast we've ever recorded, a couple of hundred, maybe 250 or so now, Vanessa, every social media video, there are thousands, I think, at this point, every newsletter we've ever written and every book we've ever written, and we've uploaded all of that content into an AI bot that is able to answer in a non-alarmist way based on good science how to address these issues. Vanessa, will you press play for a second? So here's our bot. And here's an example of when someone asks, what do I do if my kid has seen porn? And the bot thinks about it for a second and then comes up with an empathic, science-based, conversation starter filled answer, about 200 to 250 words. And we walk through, and then you'll see in the left margin, lots of related questions that have been asked by other people in the audience. And also at the bottom, links to more specific callouts for more information. The membership also includes, Vanessa, you can press play here, a visual library. Oh, I think it's on the next slide. A visual library that walks through for people who prefer visual access to what we're doing instead of AI driven. Everything we've ever created, it's reliable. It's all based on science, I promise, and it's relatable. Every piece of content is designed to meet people where they are. You can keyword search, you can search by topic. And on the next slide, you'll see a QR code that takes you to the site. But if you'd rather remember the name, it's very easy. It's lessawkward.com, because we make everything less awkward for everyone who's going through puberty, the kids and their adults. I'll jump really quickly into one question that we have gotten several different ways. Oh, I should mention, Vanessa, we also have a school-based curriculum, and anyone who has questions, check it out on Less Awkward. Please reach out to us. All of these same resources appear in our school curriculum. The question that came up several times in the Q&A is why? Why is everyone going through puberty earlier? And Vanessa alluded to it early on, but I thought I would just give you a quick answer now that you've heard everything, which is there are three real drivers. One is probably the antibiotics in our food supply. There's a lot of data that shows it's the antibiotics in poultry feed and cattle feed that are filtering down through the food supply, causing inflammation, and that probably is tipping some kids into earlier puberty. The second is chronic stress. So Vanessa talked about this, but the adrenal glands that sit on top of the kidneys don't only make DHEA and DHEAS, they also make adrenaline and cortisol, and those are actually known to tip kids into earlier puberty. So chronic stress can happen because of ACEs like financial instability, food insecurity, don't know where you're going to sleep at night. Can also happen based upon academic stressors and athletic stressors. And so there's pressure coming from every corner of these kids' lives, climate change and war and politics. It's a lot for kids to handle. The third reason is this group of 1,000 endocrine disrupting chemicals. Those chemicals are probably contributing to shifting the balance of sex hormones in the body. And there was an article that came out just a couple weeks ago about one in particular called Musk Amberette. It is part of a fragrance in a lot of the cosmetics that are sold. And so pediatricians have always said fragrance-free is the way to go. We now have proof that one of the ingredients in fragrance does probably cause earlier puberty. So our advice is go fragrance-free.
People should feel free. I love this very active chat. It's so fun. It's like, I'm so sad I couldn't see it while I was sharing, but it's like such a lively, wonderful group. Lakar, do we have time for people to throw questions into the chat? Okay, great.
Absolutely. And then I know Jeff has collected some questions that were coming in the chat. And then
Great.
also, thank you, Cara, for answering the questions that were coming up in the Q&A as well. So Jeff, I'm going to invite you back on for a spotlight. And then I am not going to go ahead and share my question screen because I just want everybody just to have a conversation and see both of your lovely faces. So Jeff, go ahead and take it away.
Well, thank you, Cara, and folks for answering a lot of these questions. I've been trying to monitor, and then they get answered. So some that haven't been answered, or I guess ones that are kind of coming in now, is let me go back here. Yeah, you were just typing this one, Cara, so I'll let you go there. Do you recommend bringing up acne, sweat, BO in a separate conversation with students and introducing I don't know what this word is. Andronarche, or is it okay to
Oh,
discuss that?
adrenarche.
Okay. Is it okay to discuss that under the umbrella of puberty?
Yeah, I mean, I think it's good to discuss it, that culturally we think of it as part of puberty, but adrenarche is often coincidental, which means it often happens around the same time, but not always. So you can have younger kids with pubic hair but are not in puberty, or you can have older kids who are like almost fully grown who have very little body hair and it comes in later. So by sort of parsing it out separately from puberty, it helps kids understand that there's a lot of different normal, and that there's not kind of like a companion, they're not walking down the path together all the time. Often they are, but many times they're not. And it just reassures kids about that.
Right. I feel like that leads into this fun question. I often get asked from youth, why do I grow hair? Do you have a way that you would answer that?
Yeah, I mean, we know that hair serves a lot of functions. It keeps the body warm, it protects certain parts of the body, especially the groin, from all sorts of infections. One thing that comes up all the time are grooming practices. Kids today talk about hair removal and practice hair removal in very different ways than they used to. And then there's sort of a whole cultural level to this, where in different cultures, hair is or isn't seen in certain ways. And hair can cause a lot of distress in families. Parents and their kids can really disagree on hair grooming philosophies. So we teach about hair. We have podcasts on hair. We have social media videos on hair. I know you guys cover hair. It is really important for us to understand the importance of hair as a biologically protective mechanism, but also we got to talk about the social and cultural choices that kids are making so that they can understand when they remove their hair what some of the implications are.
Right. And I'll ask a couple more before we go on to the next section. Lisa had thrown in a question. Any tips on talking about the wet dreams girls can experience that I can share with teachers?
Yeah, so we didn't get too much into wet dreams in this talk, but just so that everyone's super clear on how we define things. So wet dreams are when there's ejaculation from the penis, usually at night when people are asleep, and it's not thought to be associated with sexual thoughts. It could be, but it's the research. I mean, you can imagine that's hard research to do, and it doesn't look to be. Certainly you're not consciously sexually stimulated. There is a similar phenomenon that happens in vaginas where you have excess moisture essentially that can show up as a wet spot in a bed in the same way that a wet dream can show up as a wet spot in a bed. And our biggest piece of advice is to talk to kids about how these things happen. They are typical. What you do with a set of dirty sheets in order to take responsibility, you just like, no biggie, you just clean it up. I will say, I have occasionally had patients who think they're urinating, they think they're peeing in the bed, and they're not, they're having a wet dream. I've also had patients, though, who have been diagnosed with diabetes because they are peeing in bed, because they have type 1 diabetes. So if you have a question or a concern, or if this is happening often, talk to a healthcare provider.
Beautiful. Okay, let me just do one last question before I go on to my next section here. I loved what you were saying about avoiding fragrances being, the normal thing now to do that, but intense sweats during puberty is a thing. A lot of our attendees get.
I think Jeff is, yeah, there you are.
How do you answer that question if we're not pushing that?
So one of the things that kids don't always realize is that showering or bathing or sponge bathing has to include soap. So they often think that water washes away bacteria and smells. And It's really important to remind them that you need to use soap because the soap literally grabs onto the bacteria and helps the water wash the bacteria away with the soap. So fragrance-free is great. That's what we recommend. But that doesn't mean no soap. And it's really important that kids know it. And it seems obvious, but actually it's like an aha moment for many kids that they have to actually use soap.
And I'll just add, fragrance just covers over the body odor, and it usually doesn't do a great job. So kids often spray themselves or coat themselves with very perfumey substances, assuming that no one will notice the odor underneath. And of course, we've all been in rooms with kids who use this strategy, and it's not a winning strategy. And it helps them when we share with them in a totally non-shaming way, hey, there's a better way. It involves using soap.
Awesome. And Jeff, I think we have time. I'm going to try to get one more question because 2 questions came up in regards to puberty and intersex. And then I want us to pause on questions because before we end our conference, I really want you, Vanessa, and you, Cara, to share more about the platform that you've created for my health classroom, and also talking about your school curriculum as well. So the question that came up for both of you in regarding puberty is, curious on how do you talk about intersex anatomy and genital diversity as well?
Yeah. So Cara, I'll just start and then I'll let you get into the anatomy. But one of the things that we really, really emphasize is that all bodies look different. There is no one, quote, normal. And that's not just about intersex. It's also kids, because they're exposed to all this media and to porn, they assume that all body parts should be symmetrical and hairless and tanned and bleached. And so things like recognizing that vulvas, that labia are not necessarily symmetrical, recognizing that testicles are not necessarily or not often symmetrical at all, that breasts are often different sizes. So that's one way into normalizing diversity of bodies in general. And then, Cara, if you want to talk about intersex.
Yeah, so there are lots of really great resources to answer this question, and I would point this audience to the Planned Parenthood article about it, which I find, it's called What Happens During Puberty If I'm Intersex, which I find extraordinarily helpful and well written. And this article walks through that intersex includes both people who have a combination of different organs, missing organs, or their hormones don't work inside their body the way they work inside other bodies. And the article actually calls out MRKH in particular, which is a phenomenon where a person does not have a uterus. And we actually have a podcast episode where we interviewed a teenager with MRKH. She's XX, identifies as female, has all the external genitalia of a female, thought she was going to get her period, talked about getting her period for years with her mom, only to discover when she was 16 and never had a period and wound up in the emergency room, doubled over in pain, that she had no uterus. And what she speaks about beautifully is everything about the way she identifies is female, and how there's a lot of terminology that gets complicated, like people who bleed, she'll never bleed, right? So there are all these, this is a very complicated question, an important question. And it reminds us all that when we're in the front of a classroom or when we're speaking to an audience of trusted adults, that we have a responsibility to recognize that there are people in that room coming with all sorts of different bodies, all sorts of different hormonal levels and sensitivities, and all sorts of different concerns. And so when we approach intersex, the way I do it is I answer the question being asked, I point to great resources, but I remind people that we're just going to get to the physiology and the biology. We're going to talk about what happens inside a uterus, so that if you don't have a uterus, you know why that thing is not happening in your body. And this is layered for younger kids. But if we start with really clear terminology, and again, no shame, no judgment, that is the easiest way in so that we can all be in open conversation. I find the intersex conversation is one of the most interesting and layered conversations that Vanessa and I get into.
And I would just add that people, you maybe ask questions that you don't know the answer to. You may have kids having lived experiences that actually you don't know a lot about, or you haven't read the latest research, or it's a phenomenon that's only beginning to be talked about. And you can say to a kid, I'm so happy you brought this up. I actually would love to do a little bit more research, and then we can sit down and talk about it together. I think we feel incredible pressure to know the answer to everything right away. And it serves kids and frankly, our role as educators much better if sometimes we admit to not knowing everything. Lakara, I guess we'll take 2 seconds to just show people, okay. So I'm gonna share my screen again. And I'm gonna show you the Less Awkward website, which I don't know, can you guys see that? Is that okay? And then I'm gonna make it nice and big. So you can see everything we do. So this is that health class. That health class is a health and sex ed curriculum that is live for 4th through 8th grade. So for international folks, that's basically 9 to 13 or 14 years old. It's currently live in schools. It was developed and written by us and other experts we work with. This is what it includes. We have 8 lessons per grade. We feature AMAZE videos in our lessons, which are multimedia and interactive. They're so wonderful. And anyone who has access to our health and sex ed curriculum, which is called That Health Class with a little wink, has access to all the lessons. So if you have a license for the division, you have all 4th through 8th grade, because in one school, what's great for 4th grade might be better for 6th grade. And in one school, what's good for 8th grade is better for 5th grade. So you have access to everything. It includes every lesson, and every year includes a body image lesson, a consent lesson, anatomy, brain, and mood. We revisit these topics over and over again. And then our community is called the Less Awkward Community, and it includes the library, newsletter, workshops, our AI bot. And if you scroll down to this page, there's an FAQ. And then at the very bottom, there's a chance on Less Awkward to get our free newsletter where you can learn more about what we do. And you can reach out to us with any questions that you have.
And I'll just add, there's a question about the name of our podcast. It's the same as the name of our book, which is called This Is So Awkward. All of it is accessible from the website, lessawkward.com. Vanessa's browser is showing the existing homepage that will be updated today. So if it looks different when you click onto it, don't be surprised, because we are remodeling as we speak.
And if you have podcast episode requests, email us. We'd love to hear from people. And I should say, everything is called This Is So Awkward, but the tagline underneath should be, but it doesn't have to be. And it's all of our jobs and all of our privilege to make it less awkward for everyone involved. And thank you to AMAZE for inviting us, for welcoming us. We feel like so grateful for the work that you do and to be in partnership with you on so many different levels. And amazing to be in virtual community with all the folks here.
Awesome. Thank you so much. And I know you all are getting some love, Vanessa and Cara, in the chat. And I am just so thrilled to continue our partnership with both of you, Vanessa, and you, Cara, and the work that we collectively do here at AMAZE together. So thank you all so much. And please check out their podcast, check out the website, check out the curriculum. And we are going to go ahead and pivot. So thank you again, Vanessa and Cara.
Thank
you. Thank you so much.
You're welcome. Okay, Jeff, I'm going to pass it back to you for one final closing, well, 2 final closings, and that is the debut of tomorrow's video. So Jeff, let me go ahead. You introduce the video and I'm going to start sharing my screen.
Sure thing. Yeah. So everyone, well, you take it on, Lakara, if I break up. I'm being told my internet is unstable. But we are excited to see a new birth control option available on the shelves and CVS and Walgreens and drugstores and the internet across America. We've been working really hard at Advocates for Youth to get this birth control pill approved so that people can buy birth control without seeing a doctor, without getting a prescription. That's part of the Free the Pill work that I've been working on for years. And we're excited that it got approved last year. So if you have students who are coming in this year and saying, I saw birth control at the CVS, like, can I just buy that? We are putting out resources to help you. We have a one-pager for it through Advocates for Youth that you can download. But AMAZE debuts our new video explaining this product tomorrow for World Contraception Day, and we'd love your help in sharing it. So here's a little sneak peek.
Daily birth control pills are one of the most commonly used forms of contraception. Now, the U.S. has approved daily birth control pills called O-Pill to be sold in most U.S. drugstores and online. That's because the U.S. Food and Drug Administration determined that O-Pill is so safe and easy, you don't need to see a doctor or get a prescription before purchasing it. The pills can be purchased regardless of age or gender, and it will help to prevent a pregnancy by telling the ovaries not to release an egg and thicken the lining of the uterus and cervical mucus so that sperm can't get in. While most birth control pills in America are combination pills containing both progestin and estrogen, O-Pill only contains one hormone, progestin. That makes O-Pill different in two key ways. 1. Every birth control pill has to be taken once a day, but O-Pill must be taken at the same time every day. Or if you miss it, then at least within a 3-hour window. If you miss a pill or go past that 3-hour window, you should use a backup form of birth control, such as condoms. With perfect use, O-Pill is 98% effective at preventing pregnancy. Second, because there is no estrogen in a progestin-only pill, people who cannot take estrogen for some reason are able to use O-Pill. One side effect of O-Pill that is less common with other birth control methods is breakthrough bleeding and spotting, which just means a small amount of bleeding when you don't expect your period. This doesn't happen to everyone and usually stops within the first few months of use. O-Pill can be used by people of any weight, and it will not make you gain weight or affect your ability to have children in the future. In fact, there is zero evidence birth control pills have any impact on your ability to have kids in the future. None. O-Pill should not be used together with another hormonal birth control product, such as another oral contraceptive tablet, a vaginal ring, or a contraceptive patch, among others. Over-the-counter birth control is not for use as emergency contraception and does not prevent pregnancy after unprotected sex. Remember, using an oral contraceptive like a birth control pill does not protect against transmission of HIV, AIDS, or sexually transmitted infections. Condoms should be used to prevent STIs. O-Pill is only one option for birth control, and while you don't need a prescription to buy it, it's still a good idea to talk with a doctor or another trusted adult to see what kind of birth control is the right method for you. Daily birth control pills.
All right. Thank you so much, everybody. I did see the question on if it'll be released in other languages. It's being released in English tomorrow, but it's a great idea to put that in our queue of languages to translate. This is a product that is available across the country and available online, and we think a lot of young people will be talking about it. So if you have more questions about O-Pill and the over-the-counter birth control pill that's available, as I said, we do have a one-pager at Advocates for Youth, and you can reach out to that info@amaze.org email, and we'll make sure to get it to you. All right.
Yeah. Thanks, Jeff. I love the response. And Jeff, really huge shout out to Jeff for helping and developing this video on behalf of Advocates for Youth. We are so excited that this will be debuting tomorrow. And you all have been the first ones to take a look at it publicly. So shout out to you all for showing up to the conference live to get the first sneak peek of our video that will be released tomorrow. So I put in the chat earlier and I'll drop it back in the chat right now. We are closing out our conference for today. So for those who continue to come to our conference every single year, this is year 4 of our AMAZE SexEdCon, and we've had over 1,000 people register this year, and we hit about 370 people who have attended live. So again, shout out to Darcy for sharing all the work that we're doing internationally. Shout out to both Vanessa and Cara for spending their time and providing their information and resources for the greater community. So I did see some folks in the chat had some challenges with the Google form to get your certificate of attendance. If you are having some technical difficulties accessing the form, please feel free to email us at info@amaze.org, and we will be able to help you to fill out that survey and to also get you your certificate of attendance. And so finally, as we close, just some additional notes. For AMAZE, you know where to find us. We love you all so much. I'm always posting on our Instagram, Facebook, TikTok. We're always looking to expand our resources and our development for AMAZE. And then Jeff, I'm going to stop sharing my screen for the moment, as internally and now externally, we have some really exciting news, bittersweet news, but still very exciting. As I've shared before and earlier during our time together, Jeff is our Chief Comedy Officer here at AMAZE. And Jeff is actually going to be the incoming Managing Director for AMAZE. So please give Jeff some shout out. I will be stepping down from my position, and I will be unfortunately leaving Advocates for Youth and the AMAZE project. I have been accepting a new role as a vice president for another statewide organization that I'm excited to really go ahead and continue the work of sexual and reproductive health. So please give a shout out to Jeff. You will be seeing his name a lot more within communications, and I am so thrilled for you, Jeff, and congratulations, for we know we are in good hands and we are only going to pivot and move AMAZE in our amazing project forward. So Jeff, I'll pass it over to you.
Well, thank you, and congratulations to you. LaCara has been offered vice president at this organization, something she is just so extremely qualified for. I was overwhelmed when I was asked about this job, mostly because LaCara is just incomparable. If I can bring just half of your energy, strategy, and talent to this project, then I will consider that a win. You have just transformed AMAZE. And I don't know. I don't know what we'll do without you, but I guess I'll figure it out.
We will work together, Jeff. Even though I'm transitioning out, I am always huge fan, huge supporter. AMAZE is not getting rid of me, y'all. So I'll just be a little behind the scenes, but so excited and wanted to publicly share that news in this conference space. So again, please feel free, fill out the evaluation for this year's conference. And then also we will be working on getting those conference recordings out to you all within the next 48 hours to get your certificate of attendance and participation. Please be sure to complete the survey. Once again, if you're having any challenges, email me or at info@amaze.org. So without further ado, thank you all for spending your time and morning and evening with us today. And we wish you all so much success within your classrooms and the impact that you all continuously have on the young people you serve. So thank you all for joining, and enjoy the rest of your day.
Thank you. Thanks, everyone. We'll
Thanks.
follow up with that survey link, Phyllis and others.
Yes. I am dropping it once again in the chat for folks.